Welcome to episode 3, all about design. If you're planning a large-scale project, such as a renovation or even a new build, then you will want to talk to an architect, definitely. And our subject today is how interior design and architecture can work together. And I'm lucky enough to welcome Nicola from the Little Architecture Company. Nick's been running over 10 years. In a previous life, Nicola worked on large commercial projects such as Team GB's accommodation in the 2012 London Olympics. Nicola's also a previous examiner for the RIBA, not to mention a mem of 3. So welcome, Nicola. Thank you for joining us. So, first question, what made you get into architecture?
When I was at school, I just loved geography and drawing and maths. So I used to like driving around with my parents and looking at lovely houses. And it just suddenly dawned on me that I should be an architect.
Wow.
Didn't quite appreciate how much work that involved. I chose to go to quite an artistic school of architecture in London, a college called Bartlett. Had a whale of a time. And then 5 years later, entered practice in London. I mainly do residential architecture now. So it's all come full circle. I love houses. That's what I've ended up working.
Fantastic.
Great.
So you spent about 7 years in total training to be an architect?
That's right. I mean, some courses vary, but if anyone has children thinking of going into architecture, then it's a 3-year degree. And then if you continue, you do a year in practice, then another 2-year master's, and then you do your professional examinations. It might vary from school to school, but overall it's probably about 7 years.
I mean, it's even longer than being a doctor, isn't it?
About the same as a vet and a doctor.
Yeah.
I don't think there's any need for it to be that long. So.
When I first started Novo Interiors, you were very kind to refer our first client to us. Do you remember back in...
Oh, well, you're very well.
8 years ago, I think, something like that.
I think you always remember that first referral a friend did for me.
You say you work on residential projects primarily these days. How, as an architect, do you approach them? It'd be interesting to see how we can work together. But as an architect, clients come to you from the initial get-go, don't they?
So as a client, most of my referrals come from either word of mouth, a lot come through school or from previous clients or from my website. And then somebody will generally just phone me up and I'll spend some time talking through the process with them, which is, should we go forward and you're happy with the fee that I've quoted, then I would come and measure your house fully. I like to do the survey myself because I feel I get a better feel for all of the nooks and crannies.
Definitely.
Then I go and draw up the survey and I do a number of layout options for each floor level of the house, showing, including furniture. And I think this is a good overlap with yourself, Sue. So I like to show furniture and circulation around the furniture.
Yeah.
I don't concentrate on the elevational style at the start. And I'm quite clear with clients that whilst I have my own preferred style, I don't try and inflict that upon them.
Yeah.
It's very much about trying to tease out of them what they like aesthetically. If it's terrible, I do try and steer them away from it.
Yeah.
Generally, it's your house. It's either a new house or an extension. It has to be something that you like. And if I can encourage them to do something a little bit more exciting and interesting, then even better. So I would give them an options set of drawings. We have 1 or 2 meetings, and then I go away and draw those options into a more developed design and develop what it looks like, the elevations of the house. And then I would submit it for planning permission for them. And then there's other stages, but that's really the first stage, is to get planning permission for work.
So that's similar in that we say, here's a couple of ideas around your brief is, but here's a wild card.
Absolutely, the wild card.
Because sometimes you can see that house they will really benefit from that. And you're not trying to push it on them for any other reason than, actually, I think you'll love it. How often do people go for what you've come up with that they didn't even imagine and think about?
Well, I would say lately, I think prices have increased significantly. So perhaps less so now, but certainly over the years, I have had some lovely clients who have chosen the wild card and they put all their faith in you. One very lovely client who had recently lost his spouse and at the start wanted an extension. I did lots of options and it was such a lovely retro style house that I just spent a little bit of my own time saying, oh, you could do this. And he said, well, that's what I'm going to do. I think there are ways of doing quite imaginative projects without blowing the budget. So I think that's quite important that it's about being clever with materials and design.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be boring at all.
So one of the main reasons I wanted to speak to you is because I've had quite a few projects recently, that larger projects, whole houses, where the interior designer is brought in at the end or when the build is actually even finished. And I've always thought that, we could work really well in tandem with an architect. It would be great to see from your point of view if you think that'd be a useful thing as well.
I think so. And I think absolutely that clients are very much focused on one thing at a time and often aren't thinking about the interiors or the landscaping at the early stages. Yeah, it's really important that perhaps both collectively we should be mentioning this to clients. Actually, in your case, maybe it's a little bit that perhaps you need an architect to think about some of the spaces, but more so for me to say, actually it's the light in this room and the framed views are really important, but you have to think about how they are dressed as the project completes. And perhaps it would be really good to bring on somebody at this early stage to think about things like that. There are obviously smart wiring in houses, which, to be honest, is probably even a little bit past me. We learn every day. It's getting these things right from early stage, making them seamless.
That's exactly my thought. So smart home technology is coming in more and more, but in terms of being able to say to a client, if you're thinking you've got a huge window, how are you going to dress that? And actually, does it need some sort of electric hardwired in to start with? Because you don't want battery operated blinds. You want to have something that's been thought through. So that's one big example that I see time and again, that people have got the solid lintel in. They haven't allowed a pocket for the blind to recess into. There's no wiring. And they're like, well, how am I going to dress this huge window? And it's like, well, I wish I could rewind for you. But, when there is no solution other than you're going to have a battery operated blind or do it manually. But what I really like that you said is that you also do the furniture layout for them.
I do think it's really important if they're only employing me at that point, then it's really important that they understand how much space you need around a table. You don't want to spend perhaps, £2,000 a square metre on an extension and actually 30% of that is wasted as circulation because you haven't thought out how the space is used. And to have backup of yourself to explain how that would work best would be absolutely amazing.
And things like if they've got an heirloom or some giant dresser that they've got to have in the kitchen or sofa that I definitely want to bring to 2 years old sort of scenario. Nicola will put probably a general sofa and chair and I can come along and go, well, actually, how big is this? How big is that? What's your view? Which you also mentioned vistas, which is so important when you're planning your own home. And if you are going from scratch, so many questions to ask. If you are spending a lot of money on something, what are you going to be looking at? What's your line of sight? Door openings, where are the radiators going? How big are the windows? These glass corners windows are great. But then they've got no wall space to put anything against.
Yeah, and about having wall space, not just for the television, is always key. In the family room is always a key question.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a Marmite one because some people we don't have a television in the family room.
Yeah.
People, it's all about the television. It's also really lovely to have wall space to hang artwork. But radiators, you mentioned, another one. You talk about putting underfloor heating in, which is great, but it can be difficult to do that with an extension, for example, matching up an existing floor and an extended floor. So you are back in the realms into putting radiators. There are some amazing radiators on the market.
Yes.
But where do they go? How much room space do they take up? Where do you put them to get best heating effect out of them?
So many houses have, especially upstairs in the bedrooms, obviously half height radiators underneath the windows. Short curtains are really a bit of a no-no in the interior design world.
Yes.
They look like short trousers. But if you draw curtains across the radiator, then, you're losing quite a lot of the heat. So it's thinking maybe with the architect at the get-go, well, perhaps we'll use a column radiator here and then the area under the window is free. Or you can perhaps do a longer window or a picture window. So those are the big questions. And then actually, I think the initial conversations will be enough between an architect and interior design to then allow the architect to continue and the interior design to be happy that all the bits and pieces that they want to integrate further down the line have been thought out, and then perhaps come together when it's on site and it's being built. I love going to a build with the hard hat and the high-vis jacket. It's really exciting to see it come off the page and start to go up. And generally, I don't know how you feel, I've seen rooms that are going to be added on somewhere, I think, oh, it looks a bit small. And then once the walls go up,
absolutely,
come huge. And it's really interesting to mark out in real life the client, perhaps cut out some big bits of cardboard. That's where the sofa's going to go, and that's where this is going to go, and that's where the TV's going to be on the wall. And is that big enough? So,
and it's interesting you should say that, Sue. So I would say that certainly that the most successful projects, in my mind, and for the client, are the ones where they have been brave enough to take me through the whole project. Since then, I've gone on site, I've carried the problems with them, solved those problems into every detail. It does end up in a much more successful project in my mind. So that's not to say you have to commit to somebody all the way through a build, but I think it's certainly worth considering. And I think some people aren't even aware that they can take the architect through.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point, because you become a bit like a friend as well as a project manager or the person who is their contractor. And there's so many tiny details. And yet, as a designer and as an architect, those are big details for you, because the finest things in a design when it flows properly. And if you're on site to catch that, there's lots of reasons. You've got a vision, and the architect or the interior designer can walk in and go, oh, let's just look at that. Is that quite right? I definitely think it's worth keeping us on throughout the whole thing, really, where
Absolutely.
getting us involved from the start. So what sort of trends are you seeing in 2025?
I don't think aesthetically there are that many new trends as such. I think that the market is quite challenging. As we know, costs have increased significantly for materials, for builders, and house prices. So often people either are buying a house and have limited means of improving that house, or they're not able to move. So it's making best use of their finances.
Yeah.
And also in some areas such as where we're located, Sue, there's a smaller stock of more interesting traditional houses, which is perhaps a lot of people's dream is to have an Edwardian house. And there's a lot more perhaps later mid-century houses. And actually what people are realising is you can do some very interesting things to those houses, make them look quite stunning, and also improve the sustainability of those houses at the same time. So by rendering them and adding very efficient windows, so pushing the aesthetics to one side slightly, but you can have a very beautiful aesthetic, but also improve the sustainability of the house. It's going to lower your running costs moving forward. So I think that's very much at the forefront of a lot of my clients who are considering larger projects and new builds. Sustainability is probably the key.
Okay. And as an architect, and obviously with the RIBA, how do you keep abreast of everything that's going on?
Well, as a chartered architect, you are generally a member of the RIBA and the ARB, and you have to carry out a certain number of hours of CPD a year, and you have to prove that. You're not actually allowed to rejoin each year unless you've proved you've done that. So there are 10 core topics, and 2 of those are sustainability and health and safety and fire safety. Following on from Grenfell, there's been a lot of changes into domestic projects. So if you're in the middle of a domestic project as a client, you're probably aware of those extra responsibilities. And it's great because that means you're constantly learning, constantly keeping on top of your game. And you get to see other people's projects and examples. And it really fuses you. You see a project, you think, it's really clever. Look at those materials they've used. That's beautiful. It really spurs you on. I think we all need to encourage each other, don't we?
Yeah. Well, I think you never stop learning in any industry, but interior design, and especially the environmental and sustainable approach, there's so many changes and so much happening now. I was reading about some sustainable fabrics. I'm talking more about upholstery fabrics and curtain fabrics, but I know obviously you're talking more about the things that go into a build, but they're hand in hand together. The whole thing together makes such a difference. They're now making fabrics out of waste that's taken out of the ocean.
Wow.
But you can make fabrics out of pineapple leaves. Obviously, we know bamboo, we know about, recycled cottons, but cork flooring,
yes,
cork on the walls. It's one of the most sustainable products out there, and it was sort of in the 70s everywhere. Now it's back. It's inherently fire retardant, I believe.
Warm to touch.
Warm, acoustic.
It's a bit of an architect's favourite.
You take it off the tree, it'll grow back again. I think 200 times you can harvest from that tree if you want to. So really important. But as an interior designer, I have to go off and find out these things. And it's great that you're doing CPD training to keep on top of your part of things. And then that's again where the architect and the interior designer can help each other, I think. We're talking about trends and fashionable things. Have you seen any things that you steer clients away? I'm thinking design mistakes or things like a couple of my clients have wanted to have the laundry room on the first floor. Is that something you see, or do you think that's a bit of a fad?
I think it's always in the States. I understand that that's much more of a thing where people have a laundry or utility room on the first floor. I guess it depends on the size of the property. I do really get the laundry chute. I like the idea of my teens and slightly younger, not quite teen, opening a chute and putting the laundry down it. I doubt it would happen.
I was going to say, do you think it'd make it to the chute? Probably
I doubt it, but I could use it, so it would have benefits. But it's interesting on utility design because there are parts of the house which are always really important. And everybody would love a utility room, just somewhere to hide things, really, and to keep the clutter away. But where do you put that utility? A lot of people always imagine it as directly accessed from the kitchen. But actually, if you think about it, you come down the stairs with your clothes, you put the clothes into the washing area, you wash them, you may hopefully hang them in the garden in the summer, then you take them back upstairs. So that laundry room could be not necessarily located off the kitchen. And when you mention that, there's like a light bulb moment. You see, like, actually, so we don't need that. So
just because it's always been that way. Sometimes we stop seeing the obvious, don't we? Because it's not put in front of our faces. We're like, oh, we've always carried it through top 5 rooms, dropping socks on the way. Just what I do. And I've talked about the trend that everyone had these huge windows that went to an apex.
Absolutely.
And and then the front of a house, I always think, well, in the middle of the night, you go down for a glass of water and you're lit up like a rabbit in the headlights. But also if they're in bedrooms, they become quite an issue to properly dress, especially the ones where you can't even reach them to draw. Then you have to either say, well, I'm going to be able to sleep with light coming in, or you have to employ some sort of expensive system to get blackout. So do you try and steer people away, or that's their dream? Obviously, you work with them and
work with them. Historically, large windows were part of the sustainability approach to a property to use solar gain as part of the sustainable approach to the building. I think, unfortunately, a lot of people have seen those projects and want a big window on the front of my house, and for one reason or another, they are encouraged to incorporate that, and perhaps if it's facing in the wrong direction, it's not doing the sustainable job it needs to, or worse, the specification is poor. I've seen houses with very expensive glazed atria at the front that have shattered because
my goodness.
And that's a very expensive mistake. But similarly, unfortunately, because people have realised that their privacy is compromised, they then drape net curtains over them, and what a shame. So it's being very sensible about how do you think about those things, and also, like you say, you don't want it to be a 5-minute wonder where it's fashionable for 10 years. When you have a designer, it's asking them, how should we move forward? In the example of using timber cladding externally, for example, a lot of people, it's a beautiful material. I think people are aware that it silvers over time, which some people like, some people don't. You have the opportunity to stain it and regain its coloration. And use people's knowledge and skills to say, how can we make sure this looks beautiful in 10 years' time?
Because it is a commitment. And if it suddenly looks like the whole house needs updating just because you've got, you know, your timber at the front's faded, that doesn't reflect the whole house. If you did clad it with timber and you're looking for that rustic feel, but then you go through the door, if the rest of the house doesn't quite marry, the styles need to have a flow wherever possible. There's nothing wrong with having different styles in one house. It's just how you blend them together. I guess it's trying to have an overall feel for what you're trying to achieve and the look you're trying to go for between the architect and the designer from the get-go. I'll come into a project and I'll see the house from the outside or from drawings. It's not yet built. And you get a feel for it. So hopefully you can integrate that. Just because it looks nice on someone else's house down the road, is that what you really want for the next 10 years?
I think it goes back to what you were saying earlier, Sue. I think perhaps the way I work is to do the design options, and I give clients a large number of precedent images of what their house could look like, you know, with like crittle doors or large slimline sliders.
Yeah.
But that very much would tie in then what's the aesthetic of the side of the house, the kitchen. A lot of people are only really interested in the kitchen.
Yeah.
And I think having that overlap with yourself early on would be absolutely fantastic.
I think even if it's, as I say, the initial stages, then the interior designer can go off and say, well, I'll see you in 6 months. I'll come and poke my head in and have a look at the build as it's going on, and happy to speak with the architects again. But actually, we know where we're heading now as an interior designer. I think places I'm seeing people spend money now is they want that feeling of luxury. And we'll talk about COVID again in a minute. I know they've sort of done to death in a way, but it is important in terms of home design. Because I think everyone realised, actually, I'm at home a lot. I'm working from home less so now. I think there's more hybrid working going on.
Yes.
But you thought, well, I'm going to actually surround myself with luxury, and I'm going to have a nice kitchen, the beautiful marble, the master suite bedroom with an ensuite, and kitchens, bathrooms and master suites. I think some of the main parts that I see people wanting to spend a bit more money on now.
Yes, absolutely. I think the kitchen's very important, worth remembering that not everybody can afford to have the big statement, but there are some great ways of achieving that look in a different way. There's a broad range of providers of kitchens that can achieve that
Absolutely.
Look. Dovetailed oak joint down to, dare I say, an IKEA kitchen.
I was going to say,
tested to yes. I think they're amazing kitchen.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I think it's how it's finished, isn't it? So it can be an IKEA kitchen, but perhaps it's the other bits you put in with it. So I would say to somebody who's got sort of slightly less of a budget, absolutely an IKEA kitchen. I had one. I used to live in London, and I had an IKEA kitchen in there. And after 10 years, it was still fantastic. So it's about the worktop, it's about the taps, it's about handles and the splashbacks and the lighting. And obviously, some units are better than others. It's about hinges. But we're saying you can still achieve the aesthetic.
Another clever one that I've experienced with clients is where they'll perhaps go to a higher end for the main kitchen and then match it with a more budget range kitchen, almost identical in the utility unit.
That's a good idea.
And by passing through a door into the utility, you really don't notice the difference, but save yourself quite considerable sum of money.
Very good indeed. Yeah, I like that. So we were just talking about the aesthetics of a house, and actually something I've noticed recently is some beautiful details coming into houses, such as stone surround, stone windows, picking up on details that are on the house next door. So it looks like it's sort of always been there. But different sorts of cladding and weatherboard going onto houses that I haven't seen before. Is that something you're seeing much more of?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, the stone surrounds is a really good example. So, and that can be in a slightly more contemporary fashion or a slightly more rustic fashion. And it's a really good way of energising an older property. So I've seen this a lot where people have stripped the facade off but kept the majority of the house. And then you can render or re-brick the house with a facing brick on and then introduce these beautiful stone surrounds, which also have intermediate mullions, and then you feed the windows into those stone surrounds. It can be a really beautiful thing to do.
Yeah. So it elevates the whole look of that property.
It does. It's very interesting that you touch on the row of houses, it is a slight issue where one house suddenly becomes
Yes,
very different to the row. But
yeah,
I think in time, there is a limited supply of houses that's out there. So I think people will buy a house on a street and then slowly the street will change.
I'm talking about some tiers style houses that aren't particularly pretty. And actually, I grew up in a classic 1970s house. It's floor to ceiling windows in a lot of the rooms, and not the prettiest architecture. But actually, these homes now are being taken, and because of low stock opportunity and catchment areas for schools, completely changed, and some interesting details put onto them that looks authentic. And actually then the houses either side that happens too, and suddenly the streetscape has completely changed.
Very much so. There are some streets in the area we live in, and they're almost unrecognisable in the last 5 years, particularly.
I think since COVID, people decided to stay put and do an extension or renovate their property because they've realised it's so good for you to live in a place you love, and spending time and effort on and money on your home isn't a frivolous throwaway. And I always have this bugbear that people think an interior designer just faffs around with some cushions. It's much more than that. It's helping with the space planning. We get the architectural layout, then we say, right, how do you live? How's your lifestyle? What do you need to do in this house? And what makes you feel good? What do you enjoy? And it's so important that you walk in and go, live it here.
You touched on something there, Sue, where quite often I have clients have a very fixed idea that they want to create this additional space to their house. And they will come back and say, we only live in that new, we love it. Perhaps a discussion with yourself and how do you live? It's such an important question. What doesn't work for you? Not just what do you aspire to, but isn't working for you? What
absolutely,
And quite often I have discussions with families that have young children. It's about the playroom. Having had young children myself, it's difficult to explain to them that the playroom stage doesn't last very long. But those needs do change into having not a room where you lose the children, go and play on their Xbox or do their homework or have their own privacy. So those needs change. So how can you design a space that adapts?
It's very true. And a lot of the time now, talking to them about the next 5 or 10 years. So often I'll design a room. They've gone through the baby stage when the room was decorated for them, and now it's time for the boy or girl. More often I've done girls' bedrooms lately. And I'll always try and get them involved and say, what do you want from this? Obviously, mum and dad will say, this is what we want from it. I'm trying to design for 5 years from now when you don't want pink on the walls, being stereotypical. Or, you will need a desk, but you'll need a chill out area. You'll need X, Y, and Z. So that's on a more of a soft furnishing scale than an architectural scale. But I think it's still important. They might say, well, actually, I think I'm going to work from home, or I've got this hobby I have that I've got nowhere to do it. Maybe that room could be used for it. Have you got a storage? Where can we build that in is a really important thing, just to make your life feel less cluttered, because that mentally can be pressing in on somebody and feeling like, oh, I've got nowhere to put anything. Everywhere's always a mess. Actually, you'll feel much better if we can accommodate that into the new space, and then it's accessible when you need it. So that's a big one, I think. Hobbies and interests, then they are important. They're not something that's like, oh, I shouldn't spend money on. You really, really should, because it's your life. The reason you're here and enjoying your life is because you do your hobbies or your interests or your fitness. So needs to be incorporated and thought about. So another question I have, because nature is a big driving force in interior design for me. From a point of view of an architect, do people consider, if they're lucky enough to have a garden or a terrace area, is that part of what they ask you to incorporate into the design?
I would say, if I'm honest, not really. They often think of that as the next stage. Get the house done first.
Yeah.
Get it looking beautiful, and then it's the garden. I try and engage them first of all in a lot of houses that are perhaps mid-century. A lot of houses, you come into the hallway and there's no view of the garden. There's a wall in front of you. So one of my key things is trying to open that up so that you get a clear view of the garden.
Yeah.
And I think once clients are engaged with that view of the garden, they realise that actually, there is the possibility of planting a tree at the end of that view, having a window that frames a view. Perhaps it's a flower bed or a beautiful patio area.
Yeah.
The other outside area that is perhaps is becoming more common for me is people asking for green roofs,
Okay, that's good to hear.
which is really interesting. So quite often I will be asked to at least design a green roof and allow for the structure to accommodate the green roof, or
To the weight of it.
to weight
Yeah.
of it, yes, or a sedum roof. Sometimes they're called brown roofs.
Yeah.
And quite often, again, they don't get installed in the build because
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
one thing to come off the list, but I do see them installed, and when they are, it's lovely. And you see them develop over time,
Yeah.
and you see insects flying in, and it's great. So I think that's definitely something to consider as well as
Yeah.
the garden. Is
Yeah.
there an area, perhaps it's on a garden building
Mm.
or on the flat roof of an extension, that you could encourage nature? So
That's lovely to hear. What we always say is put some lighting into the garden so that it's almost an extra room. Thinking about the vista outside coming in, that, you know, at night you haven't just got a dark window to look out onto. You can put some lighting in there. Suddenly you've got this really interesting space to look at.
yes, do you get on to look at garden kitchens or outdoor kitchens?
Yes and no. So obviously there's specialists that do that, but it's coming a lot into my client sort of a train of thought, and it's designed into the larger projects. And when they've got the space in the gardens, I think outdoor kitchens. I mean, in this country, you almost need one that's got some sort of shelter available somehow, whether it's some retractable roof or it just needs very careful planning.
It's a lovely thing to have. I think it's being mindful that it will probably not be in use for,
45 weeks of the year.
Well, we'd hope a little bit more, but the likelihood not great is. So it's keeping it looking beautiful.
Thank you so much for joining us today. If you've got any questions at all for Nicola or I, then please email to contact@allaboutdesign.online, and I will speak to Nicola, and hopefully she'll come back in future episodes and answer those questions, because I think when you're doing a build of your own, there's things that will come up that you haven't even thought about, and it's great to have an expert point of view on it. And I'll share Nicola's details, her email address and the website at the end of the episode as well. Thank you so much for coming, Sue. See you soon.